I'm Vance Bastian here with my co-host S.A. Baz Collins for this week's Written on the Edge Season 9, Episode 23 interview. We'll be talking with Chris Holcombe and discussing the growth of his Hidden Gotham series. So let's get to know our guest. Chris Holcombe is the author of the LGBTQ plus historical crime fiction called The Hidden Gotham Series, which showcases New York's lively but criminally underrepresented queer world in the 1920s. His first novel, The Double Vice, was released in 2021 to great acclaim, with queer writers of crime calling it one of the best I've read all year. I can't recommend it highly enough. His second novel, The Blind Tiger, was released in 2022, and it continues the story of gay speakeasy owner Dash Parker and his queer friends in Greenwich Village and in Harlem. Readers heralded it as honest-to-goodness pulp fiction at its gayest and most glamorous. The third novel in the series, The Devil Card, was released in 2023, with readers saying it was Holcomb's best one yet. He is currently hard at work plotting and planning the next Hidden Gotham novel, and he asks that you send gin and chocolate for encouragement. And for those of you who missed it, we did discuss The Devil Card on his last interview, Chris, so I am looking forward to hearing how the series is growing. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's great to see you all.
Great to see you too. So, for folks who have missed that first interview, and we'll post a link if you're on the YouTube, you can catch it here. But how did you start in this creative path? I mean, why 1920s? What was the impetus to start?
Honestly, it's so funny. So I've been wanting to be a mystery writer since I was 8 years old. And I think I told this story in the last podcast, so forgive me if I'm repeating it, but it's a window into my psyche. I asked Santa Claus when I was 8 years old for a typewriter because I wanted to be Jessica Fletcher. And I still do, by the way. I just want to travel the world, and go to exotic places, write books, and solve mysteries. I'm not asking for much. Um, but I've always wanted to be, and I was reading Sherlock Holmes at that time and reading Agatha Christie, and then I eventually got into the PIs of like Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, which then put me into the '90s books, predominantly written by Sue Grafton, Linda Barnes, Sarah Paretsky, J.A. Jans, Patricia Cornwell. Like I was just devouring a lot of those, and so I always wanted to write a mystery novel. And I tried twice to write one in modern day. I had this idea because at the time I was obsessed with Veronica Mars. And I was like, I'm going to write a millennial detective. And I ran into two problems. The first is that if you use technology in your stories, by the time the story comes out, the technology is obsolete. So I was like, that's a problem. The second was, as my mother will tell you, when I was 6 years old, I talked like a 60-year-old man. Like I am not a hip person when it comes to dialogue and stuff like that. So it just didn't work. And so I was watching with my father a Betty Davis movie marathon, and I thought, well, could I do something like this but make it queer? Because that was the other thing, is I wanted to represent the queer community in crime fiction because we're not that well represented in that genre, particularly
Mhm.
in noir. And I thought, well, that'd be interesting, but I want to do something different with it. I didn't want to do the 1940s because I felt that'd been overdone. Like that's all historic crime fiction is 1940s. And I remember reading like years earlier. I don't know why I read this, so I can't tell you what pointed me in that direction. But I remember reading about the pansy craze of the late 1920s, early 1930s. And that was about 2007, 2008. And so my brain filed it. And then I completely forgot all about it. And then when I had this decision to be like, well, what could I do with this? My brain pulled it up out of the dim recesses of my memory and said, pansy craze, let's look into that. So I did. And that was around 2016, early 2016, and I discovered a bunch of sources, and I just fell down this rabbit hole. And I discovered that there was an entire community that was hiding in plain sight, and in some cases out and proud in Greenwich Village, Times Square, and in Harlem in New York City. And I thought, well, this is new. I've never learned of this before, because I kind of adopted the narrative that we all kind of learned, right? Like we were in the closet, we were
Mhm.
languishing until Stonewall, and then we busted out with a brick and all this kind of stuff. And it was actually like, no, no, no. The closet that we think of is actually a 1940s, 1950s construct.
Right.
And before that, there was just this fantastic community. And then once I learned that all the queer clubs in New York City were owned and operated by the mob, I was like, well, done. I got my crime element. And so then that's just that's how I got to the 1920s, and it's been there's so much stuff to work with that it had to be a series because every time I write a book, I cut 2/3 of it out, and I'm like, okay, but that'll be book two, and that'll be book three, and then that'll be book four, and then here we are.
Nice. And you just teased book four.
I am about halfway through book four, and it's actually taking place mostly in queer Harlem this time around. So the
Nice.
first three books were mostly around Greenwich Village, with the third book doing a little bit of a foray into Little Italy, Southern Little Italy, because there are actually two Little Italies in New York. And then this one, there's a side character who's been introduced in books one, two, and three. And interestingly enough, when I was writing book one, she had a big plot line in that one that I had to cut because it was too much. And now she's yelling at me to give her own story.
Which character is this?
So this character is L Train. So L Train is a cabaret performer in Harlem, and she dresses in men's tuxedos with a top hat and cane and tails, the whole bit. She is a beautiful butch black woman, and she performs at the Oyster House. Now she's based off of a real life performer at the time. Her name was Gladys Bentley. And I think since we've last spoke, I am pleased to see that Gladys is getting some of her flowers, at least online. There's a lot, I'm seeing a lot of people starting to post about her. I think she's
Nice.
now featured in the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. So I'm just like, oh, thank God. Actually, she was also even pictured in at the end of the movie Bros, where they opened up their queer museum, and then I saw like a hologram of her, and I was like, oh my God, they put her in.
Cool.
So I'm so thrilled that she's coming back into the consciousness because she was a trailblazer and just a tour de force. She performed at the Clam House. My fictionalized version is the Oyster House, but the real life one was the Clam House. And she ruled that club with an iron fist. Like she would play piano. She had a huge voice. She would vulgarize popular cabaret songs, but then she would also do like these blues numbers that would just rip your heart out. And by the end of the 1920s, she was one of the most famous queer performers in Harlem. Langston Hughes was obsessed with her. You can find several quotes of Langston Hughes describing just how life-changing seeing Gladys Bentley perform was for him. And by the early 1930s, she eventually had her own club, and she had a bigger show. So she was backed by a band. She was backed by a chorus of drag queens. Not making that up.
Nice.
I mean, and she was known to have several marriages with women at the time. Had her own private car, her own private driver. Like, so she was a huge celebrity at the time. So my fictionalized version of her, L Train, I knew once I figured out who Gladys Bentley was, I'm like, well, she's got to be in these stories somehow.
Yeah.
And her personality is so big that eventually I was like, okay, I know I'm going to have to give her own book because she's going to demand it, and now she has. And so, and what's great about that is I get to explore a part of New York City that normally I wouldn't in this
Mhm.
series, and then also learn, like I did with the history of Times Square and Greenwich Village and whatnot, a whole piece of history, a queer history that we're not really taught.
Right.
So that's going to be really fun to share with folks when book four comes out.
So I know you said you're only halfway through it, so I'm not holding you to this, but can I ask what the spark is that sets off her mystery? Like, what is the actual initial problem?
Yes, the initial problem is that she has been framed for the murder of her white wife. So she has now got to get herself off of a murder charge, and she and her friends up there in Harlem are all going to go and work really hard to find out who actually did it, and bring some justice as well as clear her name. So it is a wrongfully accused story.
Hmm.
And what's great, the way the book is structured now, I can tell you, is the first act is before the murder, so you'll get to see the relationship with her and her wife, as well as her world, building out that world, and also seeing some of the plot points that are going to tease up the main problem. Act two is after the murder, and then act three is after she's arrested, and we hit that dark moment where it's like the point of no return. And so within that, the story is dealing with a couple of things that might feel resonant today. At that time in Harlem in 1926, there was a lot of talk of unionization and striking that was going on. There was talks of the Pullman Porters unionizing. There was actually a paper box factory that was experiencing a strike that was going on for weeks. And there was this kind of return to, okay, we've done this Coolidge, President Coolidge, for those who don't get that reference, but Coolidge prosperity, which was basically like a laissez-faire, like let's just let businessmen do whatever in the hell they wanted. And because at that time in 1910s, there was this whole push for workers' rights that got rebranded as Bolshevik, communist, socialist, the stuff they
Hmm.
say now. And then a lot of workers' rights were eroded in the early to mid 1920s, and then they started to come back because if time's a flat circle, history is definitely a round circle. So what goes around comes around all the time.
Right.
So we're going to be dealing with some themes of that. And then the actually Wallace Thurman, who was a key figure in the Harlem Renaissance at that time, coined the phrase high Harlem Renaissance and low Harlem Renaissance.
Hmm.
And so the high Harlem Renaissance is what survived. So that's the poetry, the art, the respectable part of Harlem. The low Harlem Renaissance was known as the non-respectable part of Harlem. So that's the Gladys Bentleys, the speakeasies, the drag balls, the drag clubs, all of that. That kind of got, the kind of got swept under the rug over the years.
Hmm.
But there was a tension between the two at the time. So we'll be dealing with themes of that as well.
Wow. Is there anything else you want to tease about that? I don't want to push too hard. And like I said, I'm not holding you to any of it.
Right.
The only thing is that I'm hoping to put it out soon, but I don't know when, so I don't want to commit to a date yet because I want to make sure that it's right. But it's a lot of fun, and Elle is a great character. So if you were fans of Elle and the first three books, you're going to love this because this is just her personality to a T.
Nice. Now, you also have a Pride Month short.
I do. Yes, it's going to be coming out, hopefully in the next week or two. It is a short that stars Finn Francis. So Finn Francis is a side character, another side character that we meet in books 1 through 3. He is the waiter in our gay speakeasy. He is he's basically Puck, if you know your Shakespeare. He is just a mischievous little guy. Who gets into all kinds of trouble. And I gave him his own short story for Pride Month. So it takes place on a train. I was a train kid growing up. So
Nice.
I was like, I always knew, and I was like, okay, if I'm going to do historic fiction back here, we're going to have a story on a train. I didn't think I could do a novel with it because I kind of thought Agatha Christie did the best run of that. So why bother trying to do it better? But I thought a short story could work. And so Finn Francis gets into all kinds of trouble in this, 30-page short that ends with a chase scene on top of a train. That's all I'm going to say. Um,
Nice. So, short and trains back then were moving objects, but you didn't have cell phones to call for help. Is this Finn on his own? The other two don't make an appearance?
so Dash is off somewhere. So Dash Parker, who's the protagonist of the first three books, the
Hmm.
gay speakeasy owner, he's off. I'm giving him a break in this story. Joe O'Shaughnessy, the bartender and Dash's lover, is there, but they took an early train, which Joe was not happy about, and Joe falls asleep. So he sleeps the whole thing. So. So it's kind of fun at the end where Joe just kind of looks over at Finn and goes, "What happened?" And Finn's like, "Never mind, nothing, nothing." You didn't miss anything.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Your third announcement, you have delved into the world of audiobooks.
Have. Yes, yes, yes. So after we spoke last June, so in August, this narrator slid into my DMs, um, and he goes, "I hope you don't mind, but I do audiobooks, and my fans have suggested that I do your books, and I would really love to do them." And as any kind of I'm sure actually that you don't even have to be a public figure, although we're all public figures now with social media. So you
Yeah,
get
right.
all kinds of stuff in your DMs, like I
Right.
can grow your followers, and so I'm just like, I looked at it and I was like, okay, who are you? Like, so like I just Googled the name. I didn't even click on the link. I'm like, are you spam? What is this? And so I looked him up, and he is a legit award-winning narrator. His name is Joel Leslie. He has done over 500 audiobooks, over 400 of those LGBTQ plus. A
Nice.
lot of them are romance. A lot of them are period pieces. He is a master of dialects and accents. And so we had a phone call and we talked. And I said, well, let me hear you do some reading because I knew I wanted to get into audiobooks at some point, but I didn't expect to get into it that soon. So he read a couple of pages, a couple of key characters, and I was like, yeah, sure, you got the job. So he recorded the Double Vice, the first book, in February, March. We did the edits in April, and it was put out on May 1st. So it is available now on Audible. You can get it, and with your memberships or your non-memberships. They have like 3 different ways you can get the book there.
Hmm.
And I think he did a fantastic job. It was almost like re-editing and in some cases rewriting the book again. It was a lot more involved than I thought it would be. And it was involved in a different way. So I had to fill out a brief for Joel, and he had 13 questions for every single character that spoke a line of dialogue. And I was like, oh God, okay. I mean, and we're talking like everything, like how do they sound and what ways they could sound, like if they were a musical instrument, if they were an like personality was an animal, if if there was a famous person that sounded like them, like masked femme scale, like all the stuff, like age, region, like I mean, just goes into detail. And what's funny
You
is
got towards the end and you said, "Oh, I'm sorry, they died."
well, I did, first of all, I did figure out exactly how many people talked in my books. And I was like, oh, Jesus. Because, it's New York. So, like,
Right.
there's a
Well,
lot
yeah.
of
Yeah.
ambient dialogue coming in. So
You
I
can
had,
be in a diner for 5 minutes and have a cast of thousands, you know?
oh, yeah, totally, totally. People yelling on the street in your apartment
Right.
building. So I told them, I just said, for those scenes, just make it up. It's New York City. Just go to town. I don't care. But the main ones, I really had to go into it. And it actually caused me to not reevaluate, but like to go back into the biographies of some of these characters. And I'm not one of those writers that overly plans, because if I do, my brain goes, we've written it already, so we're done. Uh,
Mm.
Part of the joy of writing for me is discovery. And so I know like baselines of characters. And then as I write the story, things just kind of appear, things kind of come up. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So it
That's
keeps,
how life works.
yeah,
As
yeah,
you discover people, you discover things about them. It's the
Hmm.
organic way of reveal.
it is, yeah, and I like that because it keeps writing fresh for me. I know there are some authors who have like they write pages upon pages of all their character biographies before they even start, and I did not do that. So what's funny is then when it's like region, like not just country but region, I'm going, and I looked at my husband and I was like, oh God, I'm gonna have to make up where like Finn and Joe are from, and he goes, honey, I hate to break this to you, you made it all up. It's fine.
Yeah.
You're not contradicting anything.
Unless we place them on Alpha Centauri, it's fine. You're gonna be okay.
Right, right. So I was like, oh gosh, okay. But yeah, but it was really interesting. And then, I had to go through the manuscript again because, as well as you try to edit these things and put it through proofing and other editors and everything, there's always stuff that goes through. So you had to go back in and fix them because, he'll automatically kind of fix some phrases, but if there's some things where it's not apparent what the fix is, he'll read it as is.
Hmm.
So I had to go through the manuscript beforehand. Then once he recorded it, I had to go through it again, listening to the entire book. And I had to timestamp any fixes that we wanted. And, this book is 87,000 words, which is about 347 pages. And someone who was reading it, and Joel is an actor. I'm just going to say it. He is an actor. He approaches it like an actor. So, like, he infuses a lot of dramatic emotion into the scenes, whether it's comedic, whether it's suspenseful, whether it's romantic, and everything. And so it's not like it's a fast listen in terms of like he just kind of reads it straight. So it's a 9.5 hour book unabridged. So I had to listen to 9.5 hours of the audiobook, going through my own book again, to kind of, any kind of punch-ins that we had to do, which there weren't that many, but, just to kind of go through all of it. And it's like, oh my goodness. So it really was like, revisiting this entire book all over again, like almost re-editing, revising, not really revising, but, just going back through it again twice. So it was, but it was actually really fun because then it recalled a couple of scenes and a couple of things I forgot that I put in book one. Because after 3 books, I'm like, after I finish a book, like it's out of my mind, so I can actually focus on the next one. So it was kind of fun to go, oh, I did that. Oh, that's fun. Okay, let me write that down so I don't do it again. Because I don't want to repeat myself too much.
Uh-huh. That's awesome. That sounds like a wonderful listen.
Oh, yeah, it is. It is. And if you love dialects and accents, you're going to love this. Like we have 3 different kinds of Irish accents. We have all kinds of New York accents. We have Italian Brooklyn accents and everything in between. And Joel does a fantastic job of bringing the characters to life and the story to life. So it's a very immersive listen.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like folks to know about the series or where you're taking it?
Where I'm taking it. Well, I talked pretty extensively about book 4. I think but that does kind of tease into something that actually my husband gave me the idea for, because I had all these great characters, and I like a singular point of view in a mystery. I'm not necessarily a multi-point of view fan. I like kind of, as a reader and a writer, being in the moment and discovering things along with our detective, as we move throughout the story. But I had all these great characters. And I was looking at my husband going, I don't know what to do, because maybe I do multi-point of view. And he goes, well, you could just do what Marvel does, because he's a big superhero fan. He goes, you can have like your Iron Man books, and then you can have like, your Thor books and like all these things. And I was like, oh, so we're going to make like a Hidden Gotham Marvel type of universe type of thing. So hopefully y'all don't have to pay for the use of the name Marvel. um, um, but so yeah, so what that means is like, especially with a short story, as well as, if there's a character and a storyline that really pops up, and I'm like, oh wait, it's going to be like a Finn story or an Elle story or a Joe story, or whoever else is in the universe, that gives me the freedom to really do that. And so we'll definitely come back to Dash, for sure. And for those Dash fans, I won't leave him alone for too long. But the Hidden Gotham universe is going to kind of expand, so we can show off all of the queer community in New York City at that time. So
awesome.
yeah.
All right. Are you ready for this year's Get to Know You questions?
Yes.
Take it away, Bess.
All right. So in this year of diving deeper, what's your favorite writing snack or drink?
Writing snack or drink is going to be coffee and a power bar.
My new one is, I think I have it here. I can show people. I just discovered this bad boy. Well, my mom did. So I discovered this bad boy from Costco.
Oh.
And it's got blueberries and all kinds of fruit, but it's got cashews and almonds and stuff. Tasty, tasty, tasty. It's got all the tart from the dried out berries, and then you get like this crunch of it. I'm telling you, man, this stuff is killer. It's just great because you stick a handful in, throw it in your mouth, and just keep typing away. So I totally get. I didn't really ever have a snack, but man, this sure put it on the map for me. So
all right,
shout
I'll
out.
check it out.
We would love if they would come and become a sponsor to the show. I will talk it up every week. Nobody's listening. Okay, so that's what I would say. So your snack was again?
It was coffee and a power bar.
Power bar.
Power bar. Okay, that works too. All right, what did you do? Okay, now I'm gonna put my dentures back in. What books did you grow up reading?
Oh gosh, I grew up reading Sherlock Holmes initially, and then I blew through all those short stories and novels, and then Agatha Christie, and then I went and really dove into private investigators, and I really loved the female private investigators of the 90s. So the Kinsey Mohone series, the V.I. Warshawski series.
What age are we talking in your life when you discovered these?
I middle school, high school,
Oh, okay.
and so actually, so funny story. So I got the flu my sophomore year of high school, and I was out for 2 weeks. And there's only some. This is back when daytime television was really the hits, y'all. Like there wasn't anything. This is like the mid to late '90s, all right?
Where is
And I
Phil?
was
I don't
bored.
feel love me anymore.
Right. And so I found a copy of A is for Alibi, which is Sue Grafton's first book. And so then I read that like basically in a day and a half. And then I begged my mother because I couldn't drive at that point. I'm like, please go get me some other letters. And so I just kind of went through the alphabet, and she was actually one of my biggest influences. I actually got writing advice from her later when I was writing my first and second books. Um,
Nice.
and
Nice.
she was just really really sweet, and she was but also very no nonsense, and it's a great series. It's actually, I guess you could probably say it's a historical series now because it started in 1982, and the she kept the series in the 1980s. So there's no cell phones, there's no internet. Like you have to go find a payphone, you have to go to the library and look up like stories on microfiche. And in my head, when I read the books and reread them, it's like a female like Rockford Files or like a Cagney Lacey. Like it just
Oh,
feels
there
like
you go.
that kind of show.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's smoking indoors, and
Mm-hmm.
old fashioned telephones ringing everywhere. It's a great series, and she made it all the way to Y. And then because life is cruel, she died of cancer before she could finish the alphabet. So the
Oh,
alphabet ends at Y. But it's a great series, and I reread it actually during the pandemic, like all the way through A to Y, and it was remarkably consistent for a series. You got to see the growth of that character's universe and just the growth of her as a storyteller. It's really great. And then speaking of audiobooks, her audiobooks are done by a great actress named Judy Kay. Judy Kay is a Tony Award winner, what have you. And I mentioned this because earlier this year I got to meet her, and because some friends of my husband's were in a play together with her, and so we went to go see it, and we met her at the after party. And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm the biggest fan of you! Like you are like the voice of Kinsey Mohan." And she goes, "Oh my gosh!" And so she was telling me some stories between that she had with Sue, because she worked with Sue very often. She goes, that was a great time in my life. So if you're an audiobook fan, the Judy Kay narrations of the Sue Grafton series is just fantastic. You have to do it.
All right. Excellent. Who has been the biggest supporter of your writing?
My husband.
Yeah, oddly enough,
yay.
that's how it works out.
No, and but I mean, but it was his, because I'm an indie author, so it was his suggestion, like, to put it out. So I had written that Double Vice by 2018, 2019, and I was shopping it around, and I wasn't getting any traction with agents because they were like, I just don't know how to sell this. They're like, it's you're doing the 1920s, which isn't on the bestseller list. If you look at the bestseller list for historical, it's all 1940s or late 1930s, right? Everyone loves their World War II stories. And no one's doing the 20s, and no one's going to believe that this world existed in the 1920s. I'm like, well, I've got the receipts, which the thing is, in all the books, there is an acknowledgement at the end that will tell you like what I used, where I got it from, who is it based on. So like I have the receipts. And so after about like almost 2 years of that, it was during the pandemic, and my husband goes, just put it out yourself. You're a marketer. That's my day job. He goes, just sell it yourself. You can do it. And so and we're here today because of him and his support for that.
Well,
So
there you go. There you go.
Nice.
Can't get any better than that. All right. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
morning person. In fact, last night at like 10 p.m., the show's still going on, and I'm just like, oh, this is past my bedtime. I turn into a pumpkin so fast. It's so funny that I, married a man in show business whose hours are so late, and so he comes in, and then I'm usually getting up. So, but yeah, definitely a morning person.
Okay. What's your favorite hobby outside of writing?
Oh, cooking. I
Nothing wrong with that.
love cooking. I wish I had more time to do it because we've been so busy lately, but I just love it. There's something relaxing about it. I love discovering new recipes. Plus, there's just something nice about taking an onion and a big knife when you've had a bad day and just chopping the shit out of it. Um, just to be like, okay, I'm getting all of my day's aggression out. So,
Right, right. That's when bread making really comes in handy. Work that gluten. All right. Has writing and publishing your books changed the way you see yourself?
yes, it is.
I'm more schizophrenic than ever.
My gosh. No, I've become more aware of, well, let me say, actually, let me rephrase that. So I'm a perfectionist. And when you start to write books and you start to write a series, especially once you have like you're gaining a readership and now the readers like, when's the next book coming out, the next book coming out. Linda Barnes, who was an author in the 1990s, great series, take place in Boston, 6'5", redheaded woman, PI / cab driver. Fantastic. You should check her out. I saw an interview with her early on when I started writing because I was just devouring any type of interview on YouTube that I could see of writers that I loved and respected. And she said something great, and I internalized it, but I didn't really get it until book 2 or 3. She goes, "Books aren't finished; they're abandoned. You can always edit this book in perpetuity. Like at some point, you have to walk away from it. You have to go, it is fine enough, or it's as good as it's going to get.
Done.
It's done." But so you have to like let it go. And I didn't realize before I started this journey how hard that was going to be.
Mm.
And to realize, go, okay, I'm just gonna have to do it. And every time I hit submit, every time I put it out there, like I am a basket case, my poor husband, because I'm always like, oh, it sucks, it's awful, and then everyone, and then it's not. But like, there's that piece. So it's made me more aware of my perfectionism, and it's made me learn how to let go of aiming for the perfect, because not even just releasing it, but also writing the next one. Like, I always get to this point halfway through where I go, oh, this book sucks, it doesn't work, and da 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 da. And my husband goes, it's part of your process. You'll get here, and then you'll go back to the beginning. You look at it and go, oh, and then you just rearrange things, and then you can finish it. Because I think the other thing that I've learned as a writer is I write 3 scenes at once in one scene. And because I'm a pantser, I'm a discovery writer, so I was like vomiting, kind of like, oh, who this character is and what they know and everything. But of course, once you get to the halfway point, you've already told too much. And so then I have to stop, look back at those scenes, and then chop them up, and then move them into the second and third acts. And then I go, oh, now I can finish the book. But it's definitely helping. It's definitely changing the way that I I guess I'm embracing the less perfect. Uh, leave it at that.
Okay. If you were to write a spinoff about a side character, which one would you pick?
Oh gosh, well, I think I've already kind of mentioned a couple.
Yeah. Yeah. So far, you've got L Train and Finn. So who's your next spinoff? I guess is a
Yeah.
better question.
Oh my gosh. Well, there are actually 2 gangster characters in this series. The first is Nicholas Fife, who was in the Greenwich Village world. He is Dash's liquor supplier. He is the most fun to write. Now, I love villains. I mean, my first word on this planet was Maleficent. So that should just tell you everything you need to know about me.
With gay men, it's either Maleficent or it's Endora. We go to our queens.
Indeed, and I was running around because I spoke later in life, because actually, a quick story. I actually had I didn't hear for the first 2 years of my life, and so I finally got several surgeries, and all of a sudden I could hear, and so then I could start speaking. So I was about 2 years old, and Sleeping Beauty was released out of the vault back when the vault was a thing for Disney, and I had a blanket around me, and I'm running around the house, speaking whatever, and my mother looks at me. She goes, "Chris, who are you?" And I look at her and I just go, "Maleficent." And then she's just like, Okay. So I love villains. So Nicholas Fife to me is kind of like a gay male version of Maleficent in a way. Like, he's very preening, he's very proper, he's very seductive, in a way, until he turns. That's good Fife. And then when he turns bad 5, he is just like all fury. So he's basically like the dragon, like he is frightening and terrifying. And you never know when that shift is going to happen. So he toys with Dash and he toys with others. And so I figure he would be a fun one to write along with the Harlem version, who is known as the Baroness of Business. And her name is Zora May. You meet her in The Double Vice. She's coming back in book 4, in Elle's book, and she runs all of Harlem, and she runs the rent parties and the numbers running, and she's very powerful. And she's actually, it's interesting. I thought I made her up, and then and this happens a lot in this series, that I go, it could be true, and then I write it, and then later I will find historical evidence of women like that actually existing. And so there's actually a couple of great examples. One of who is, let's see if I get the name right. Her last name was St. Clair, and she was famous in Harlem. She was a millionaire, and she was mostly single her entire life, and she just ran Harlem. She was like a huge, huge figure, but she wasn't necessarily a mobster. She took on the mob as well as taking on the FBI. Like total badass. You should look her up.
Excellent.
Nice.
All right. Have you ever traveled as research for your book?
Yes, I have. Well, I've definitely gone to all the different places in New York, obviously, especially pandemic lifted. So, but I recently went to Provincetown. What was it, 2022, I think, because the Provincetown Playhouse was doing a stage production of Mae West's The Drag. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mae West, who is a gay icon, and she would tell you that she stole her act from drag queens, and she wrote several plays in New York, and one of them was Sex, which was on stage on Broadway in 1926. And while she was doing that show, she was hanging out with drag queens after hours, and she was just writing down all the stuff that they would say. And then she created this kind of 3-act play called The Drag, and she hosted auditions for it in Greenwich Village. Reportedly, she said, we'll see if this is true. Mae West was known to exaggerate a bit, but 3,000 men showed up to be in this play about gay men and drag queens. One of whom she said, but wouldn't name, was from the mayor's office of New York at the time. And so then they did the show in Massachusetts, Connecticut. It came to New Jersey. It was going to go to Broadway. Now, this play in the 3rd act recreated a drag ball and reportedly had 30 drag queens on stage just ripping and impromptu and all this stuff, all in regalia. And it is a play about gay men, and about gay men's nature. And it was dealing at the time with this question of, is it nature or nurture? And now, if you read the play, it's a little dated in places, but the drag queen dialogue is pretty much what it is now. Like, they've always been that sassy, that irreverent, that just wonderful and fabulous. So they were doing a stage, and it never made it to Broadway because New York and New Jersey conspired to shut both plays down. So they shut Sex down, they shut The Drag down, and they created the padlock laws, which was a precursor to the Hays Code in the 1930s. But Provincetown Playhouse was doing a staged version of this. So I'm like, well, we have to go. And it was fabulous. It was just really fun to see. And they brought it, they brought that play and they brought gay 1920s to life. So
nice.
Sorry, I talk a lot. I'm getting to realize I'm giving you really long answers.
That's fine. That's fine. So finally, how do you celebrate when you finish a book?
I celebrate with a bottle of Veuve champagne. I've done that ever since I finished the first draft of my first book.
Nice.
And so that is the first thing I do, is I run out and I get it, and now, especially with my husband around, we cheers. But that's got to celebrate with bubbles.
Yeah, even just a little bit.
Yeah. Hashtag pinkies up.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Or as Midge Maisel would say, tits up.
You made it through the list.
Yay, bravo.
So you've already teased the short stories coming out next week, you said?
Yeah, hopefully the next week or so. We're dealing with a couple of like technical issues, but yeah, I'm hoping to have it out hopefully by the time this airs. But the story is going to be called The Red Fox. It will be on Amazon only, but it'll be part of the Amazon short. And it's a fun, fast read. It's an action adventure story. And actually, one of the things I'm going to be exploring is kind of doing some of these shorts, some of these kind of ideas that don't necessarily make it as big plots as A plots or B plots in books, but also to kind of, I want to use it as a way to experiment with some other kind of genres that are still kind of in the crime historical fiction world, but like different aspects to it. So, to kind of expand my tool set as a writer and keep things interesting, and also dealing in with some backstories for some characters as well. But the Red Fox with Finn Francis should be out shortly. The short should be out shortly. And
Well, where's the best place for people to follow you to keep up with these release updates?
yes, okay. So the best way to do that is I do have a newsletter, a monthly newsletter, because social media algorithms being what they are. You may, even if you follow me on social media, which I'll tell you where you can find me on there too, but you may not see me. The best way to know when these things are coming out is to join the email list. So you can go to my website at chrisholcombe.com. There'll be a button there that'll be like, I think it'll be like sign up. You click that and you sign up just with your name and email. I promise I do not send more than I need to, because I don't have time to send a lot of updates. You will get an end of the month kind of like recap of everything that's happened. And then once release things are happening, you'll just have a quick email that says, hey, this is released. Here's where you can go and get it. So that's the best place to do that. So chrisholcombe.com. You can find me on the social medias. I'm very active on Instagram at thechrisholcombe.com. You can also find me on, I did take the plunge. I am on the TikTok, but that one's more about queer history and queer slang. But you can follow me there also at the Chris Holcombe. And I do have a Patreon. So for those who are interested in kind of more behind the scenes look, so like what goes into the audiobook, what's going into the current book, to get a sense of what it's like to be an author, an indie author, and writing this series, you can join my Patreon for just $5 a month. There's weekly updates there. Right now we're running a series called Behind the Mic with Joel Leslie. So Joel was gracious enough to film some answers to questions that I asked him, and you get to hear kind of his process and kind of how he approached the audiobook. So you kind of get to see a little bit behind the scenes on that. And one of the things we're also going to do in that Patreon is have a tour of Greenwich Village, so you'll actually get to see, at least in modern times, the areas that these stories take place. And so that's only going to be on the Patreon. So if you're really interested in that, you can join that. The Patreon is Chris Holcombe Author. So for just $5 a month, that's all I got.
Nice. Any final words of wisdom?
Final words of wisdom. Mainly just because we've been listening to it a lot. To quote the Indigo Girls, it's a life after all. So let's remember to stay joyful and happy. This is a tough year for everyone in a variety of aspects. It's hard to find joy, but I think we should. And especially for all of us queer folk in Pride Month, joy is a form of protest, because oppressors and what have you really hate it when we're happy. So even though there's a lot of negative shit happening right now, queer joy is a big FU to people. So don't let them take your joy. Don't let them take your happiness. And yeah, stay fabulous, everyone.
Stay fabulous and be safe. There's been a lot of warnings of Pride events being infiltrated by the wackos that are out there, and unfortunately we have to deal with them all. But have a happy and safe Pride season.
Exactly.
Watch out for each other.
Take care of each other.
Yes. Yeah. What a thought.
All right, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Chris Holcombe for joining us. Chris, thank you so much for coming back and sharing the updates on your series.
Yeah, Kate, thanks so much for having me. I love talking with you guys. It's such a treat, such a fun time.
Yay, it's our pleasure. All right, we at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. So if you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. The show was produced by Rogue Ravens Media, so for our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.ropepodcast.com. Tune in next week for your queer media fix.
Happy Pride.
Oh, what's that?
Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.